Her billionaire husband went to Europe for a month with mistress and left her with just $20 while she was 9 months pregnant. When he finally came back, what her billionaire husband saw made him gasp, "No, no, this can't be happening. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories, your own family story channel. Heavenly God, today I bow my heart before you with deep gratitude and humility. Please cover every woman in this family with your divine strength. Bless her body with health, her mind with peace, and her heart with courage that never breaks. She carries homes on her shoulders, heals wounds with silence, and loves without limits. Honor her sacrifices, reward her patience, and protect her dignity at every step of life. Give her rest when she is tired, hope when she is silent, and joy when no one notices her pain. Let every woman here feel seen, valued, respected, and deeply loved. May her prayers be answered before they even leave her lips, and may her life be filled with comfort, safety, and endless grace. My beautiful family, I write with honesty and love. When you stay till the end, when you like and comment, it tells me my words matter to you. It takes only a second, but it gives strength to your brother Mr. Peter and keeps this family united. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter. Let's start with love." The suitcase was Italian leather, the kind that cost more than most people earned in a month. Pamela Broad watched her husband Larry Donald fold silk shirts with the careful precision of a man who cared deeply about appearances and nothing about the woman standing behind him, 9 months pregnant and swollen with his child. "You'll be fine while I'm gone," Larry said, not looking at her. It wasn't a question, it was a dismissal. Pamela's hand rested on her enormous belly, feeling the baby kick with what seemed like protest. The kicks had been getting stronger lately, more insistent, as if her daughter was trying to tell her something important. "Larry, the doctor said it could be any day now. The baby's dropped. I've been having contractions all week, real ones, not Braxton Hicks. Women have babies all the time, Pamela." Larry zipped the suitcase with a sharp final sound that seemed to punctuate the end of something neither of them was willing to name. "Your mother had 5 kids. You'll manage one." He finally turned to look at her, and Pamela searched his face for something, concern, love, even basic human decency. She found nothing but impatience, as if she were an inconvenient employee keeping him from an important meeting. His eyes were already distant, already in Paris with someone else. Larry's phone buzzed on the dresser. The screen lit up with a message preview. "Can't wait to see you in Paris, baby. I already miss you. Andrea." The sender's name was just a heart emoji, but the message had displayed the name for a split second before the screen dimmed. Pamela had seen that name before, Andrea from accounting, the new hire with legs that went on forever, and a smile that lingered too long whenever Larry was around. "That's Andrea, isn't it?" Pamela's voice came out smaller than she intended, barely more than a whisper. She hated how weak she sounded, how defeated. Larry's jaw tightened. A muscle twitched near his temple, the tell he had whenever he was about to lie. He grabbed the phone and shoved it in his pocket with more force than necessary. "It's business, Pamela. You wouldn't understand the complexities of international negotiations. I understand that you're leaving your pregnant wife for a month to go to Europe with another woman. That seems pretty simple to understand. Don't be dramatic. This is exactly why I don't discuss business with you. You immediately jump to conclusions and get emotional." Larry pulled his wallet from the nightstand, flipped it open with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, and removed a single $20 bill. He held it out to her like he was handing a tip to a parking attendant who'd taken too long to bring his car around. "This should cover groceries and whatever else you need." Pamela stared at the money. $20. She was standing in a mansion worth $8 million, surrounded by cars that cost hundreds of thousands each, married to a man whose watch, The Patek Philippe he wore casually, like it was nothing, cost more than most people's houses, and he was leaving her with $20. Larry, that won't even cover a week of groceries. That won't cover anything. Then be smart about what you buy. There's rice in the pantry, beans. You don't need expensive things right now. The baby certainly doesn't care what you eat. He pressed the bill into her hand, his fingers cold despite the warmth of the house. I'll be back in a month. Maybe less if the deals close early. Andrea thinks we can wrap everything up in 3 weeks if the investors are aggressive. Andrea thinks. Not we think. Not I think. Andrea. What if the baby comes while you're gone? What if there are complications? The doctor said my blood pressure has been concerning. Then you'll handle it. That's what women do. They handle things. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a cold, perfunctory touch that felt more like obligation than affection, the kind of kiss you'd give a distant relative at a funeral. You'll be fine, Pamela. You always are. You're tougher than you think. The baby kicked hard, as if trying to reach through Pamela's belly and punch its father. Larry didn't notice. He was already walking toward the bedroom door, phone in hand, probably texting Andrea that he was on his way, that he'd be free of his pregnant wife soon, that they could finally have their romantic European adventure. Larry, please. Pamela hated the begging in her voice, hated the desperation that crept into every syllable, but she was 9 months pregnant and terrified, and he was all she had. Her parents had passed away years ago. Her friends had slowly disappeared after she married Larry and moved into this gilded cage of a mansion. Don't go, not right now. Just wait until after the baby comes. A few more days, that's all I'm asking. Please. Larry stopped in the doorway. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, Pamela thought he might turn around, might see her, might choose her, might remember the woman he'd married 5 years ago and promised to love in sickness and health, for richer or poorer. He didn't turn around. I'll send you pictures from Paris, he said, his voice already fading as he moved down the hallway. Try not to worry so much. It's bad for the baby. Then he was gone. Pamela stood in the bedroom, listening to his footsteps echo through the massive house. Each footfall sounded like a countdown to her isolation. The front door opened, that heavy oak door that Larry had insisted on because it was imported from a castle in Scotland and cost more than a car, closed with a decisive thud that seemed to shake the walls. His car started in the driveway, the Bentley Continental GT, not the Mercedes S-Class, because apparently mistresses deserved the better car. The engine roared to life, all 600 horsepower, announcing his departure. The sound of expensive machinery faded down the driveway, through the gate, onto the street, and then there was nothing. Silence. The kind of silence that fills a house that's too big for one person. The kind that echoes with loneliness and broken promises and the weight of everything left unsaid. Pamela looked down at the $20 bill crumpled in her fist. Andrew Jackson's face stared up at her, somehow accusatory. Then she looked around the bedroom, the king-sized bed she slept in alone most nights because Larry always had late meetings or early flights or business dinners that ran long. The walk-in closet full of designer clothes that didn't fit her anymore, maternity wear mixed with pre-pregnancy outfits she'd probably never fit into again. The marble bathroom with the heated floors that Larry had complained cost too much to run, so he'd had them disconnected on her side while his side remained warm. This was her life. This beautiful, empty, expensive prison where everything cost a fortune and nothing had any value. The baby kicked again, harder this time, almost painful in its insistence. Pamela pressed her hand to the spot and felt the tiny foot pushing back against her palm, this little person inside her who had no idea what kind of world she was about to enter. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We'll be okay. I promise. Mama's going to figure this out. Somehow." She didn't believe it. The promise felt hollow even as she made it. Another lie added to the mountain of lies this house was built on. But she said it anyway, because that's what mothers did. They lied to their children about safety and security and happily ever after, even when they knew the truth was so much darker. Pamela walked to the window and looked across the manicured lawn to the neighbor's house. Paul Gary's house. They'd been friends once, before Larry, before the wedding, before everything changed. Paul had tried to warn her, had pulled her aside the night before the ceremony and said, "Pamela, you deserve someone who looks at you the way I look at you, like you're the only person in the world, like you matter more than anything else. Larry doesn't look at you that way. He looks at you like you're an acquisition." She'd laughed it off, called it pre-wedding jitters, married Larry anyway because he was successful and charming and promised her the world. Paul had bought the house next door a few months after the wedding, and she'd thought it was coincidence, had thought he'd moved on, had convinced herself that she'd made the right choice. Now, standing in her empty mansion with $20 and a husband who'd chosen Paris over her, Pamela wondered if Paul had been right all along. The contractions started just after midnight. Pamela woke to a pain so sharp it stole her breath, her entire abdomen seizing in a way that was different from all the practice contractions she'd been having. She lay in the dark, one hand on her belly, the other clutching the sheets, counting seconds between spasms the way the doctor had taught her. 30 seconds of pain, 2-minute break, another contraction, stronger this time, real. This was real. Pamela reached for her phone on the nightstand, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to unlock the screen. She dialed Larry's number, already knowing what would happen, but needing to try anyway. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "You've reached Larry Donald. I'm unavailable right now. Leave a message." "Larry, it's me." Pamela tried to keep her voice steady, tried not to sound as terrified as she felt. "The baby's coming. I'm having contractions and they're getting closer together. I need you to call me back. Please, Larry, I'm scared." She hung up and waited, staring at the phone screen like she could will it to light up with his name. The seconds ticked by, the minutes. Another contraction hit, and Pamela cried out into the darkness. The sound echoed through the empty house, swallowed by expensive silence and 14-foot ceilings. She called again. Voicemail. "Larry, please, I'm not joking. This is real. The contractions are 5 minutes apart now. I think something might be wrong. There's—" She looked down and saw wetness on the sheets. "My water just broke. Larry, please call me back. Please." Hang up. Wait. The phone stayed dark and silent. Again. This time it didn't even ring. He'd turned it off, shut down his phone completely so he wouldn't be disturbed during his romantic European getaway. "Larry, please, I'm begging you." Pamela was crying now, full sobs that made it hard to breathe. "I can't do this alone. I need you. Your daughter needs you. Please, please call me back." She tried 5 more times. Each call went straight to voicemail, each message more desperate than the last, each silence afterward more crushing. Another contraction hit, worse than the others. Pamela felt something warm between her legs, and when she looked down, she saw blood soaking through her nightgown. Too much blood. Way too much blood. The wetness spread across the expensive sheets Larry had ordered from Italy, dark stains blooming like grotesque flowers. "No, no, no, no." Pamela tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't hold her. The room spun, her vision blurred at the edges. She made it halfway to the bathroom before she collapsed, her knees hitting the cold marble floor with a crack that she barely felt through the panic. "Please, baby, please be okay. Don't leave me. You're all I have." Another contraction. The pain was unbearable now, accompanied by pressure so intense, Pamela was certain she was going to die right here on the cold marble floor of a house that had never felt like home. She tried to crawl toward the bathroom, toward her phone that had fallen a few feet away, but her hands were slipping in the blood. There was so much blood. Through the haze of pain and fear, Pamela saw light across the lawn, the neighbor's house, Paul Gary's house, the man who'd warned her, the man who'd loved her and lost her and stayed nearby anyway. The light in his window went off, then on again, off, on, like a signal. He was awake. Pamela didn't know if she made a sound, didn't know if her body somehow called out to him, didn't know if it was God or fate or just desperate coincidence. But she saw Paul's front door open, saw him look toward her house, toward her bedroom window where the lights were blazing, saw him pause for just a second before he started running. "Hold on," Pamela whispered to her baby, to herself, to whoever might be listening. "Someone's coming. We're going to be okay. We have to be okay." She didn't know if that was true, didn't know if anything would ever be okay again. But she said it anyway because that's what mothers did. They made promises they had no power to keep, hoping desperately that the universe would decide to honor them anyway. The last thing Pamela saw before the pain overwhelmed her completely was Paul's face appearing in her bedroom doorway, his expression transforming from concern to absolute horror as he took in the scene, the blood, the collapsed woman, the phone showing a dozen unanswered calls to a husband who couldn't be bothered to pick up. "I've got you," Paul said, and his voice was the most beautiful sound Pamela had ever heard. "I've got you. You're not alone. You've never been alone." Then everything went dark. Chapter 2. The 48-hour vigil. Paul had lived next door to Pamela Donald for 5 years. 5 years of watching her slowly disappear into a marriage that devoured her piece by piece. 5 years of seeing lights go on at odd hours, hearing arguments through walls that weren't quite thick enough, noticing how her smile grew smaller each time they passed on the street. 5 years of loving a woman who belonged to someone else. He'd been working late when he saw her bedroom light flashing, on, off, the erratic pattern of distress. He was already moving, throwing on shoes, running across the lawn that separated their properties. The front door was locked. Paul pounded on it, shouting Pamela's name. No answer. He tried the side door. Locked. The garage, nothing. He was about to break a window when he remembered the spare key Pamela had given him years ago, back when they were friends, before Larry had made it clear his wife wasn't allowed to have male friends. Paul had kept that key for 5 years, until now. He burst through the front door and took the stairs 3 at a time, following the trail of blood. What he found made his stomach drop. Pamela, collapsed in a spreading pool of blood and amniotic fluid, her nightgown soaked through, her face pale as death. Her phone clutched in one hand, the screen showing Larry's contact information. Paul could see the call log, 17 missed calls, all unanswered. "Pamela?" Paul dropped to his knees beside her, pressing fingers to her throat. Her pulse was weak, fluttering. "Oh God, Pamela, stay with me." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Paul, what are you? Don't talk. Save your strength." He scooped her into his arms, heavy with pregnancy and pain and betrayal. "I'm getting you to the hospital, right now." "The baby," Pamela gasped as another contraction hit. "I know. The baby's coming. We're going to make it, I promise." Paul carried her down the stairs, moving as fast as he dared. His car was running in his driveway. He'd left it that way, instinct telling him he'd need to move fast. He laid Pamela in the back seat, grabbed blankets and towels, then got behind the wheel. The hospital was 20 minutes away. Paul made it in 11, running red lights, ignoring speed limits, praying no cops would stop him. "Talk to me, Pamela. Stay with me." Paul kept one hand on the wheel and reached back to grip hers. "Tell me what happened." "Larry left," Pamela said through gritted teeth. "He's in Paris, with Andrea from his office. He left me $20 and went to Paris." Paul's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He didn't trust himself to speak. If he spoke, he'd say things that wouldn't help her right now. "I called him over and over and he won't answer. He turned off his phone. He's in Paris, and I'm—" A scream tore from her throat. "What if the baby dies, Paul? What if I'm doing this alone, and she dies, and it's my fault?" Stop. Paul's voice was firm enough to cut through her panic. Listen to me, Pamela. You are the strongest person I know. You're going to get through this. Your baby is going to be fine, and you are not alone. Do you hear me? You are not alone. Pamela squeezed his hand hard enough to hurt. Don't leave me. Please don't leave me. Never, Paul said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Not now. Not ever. The hospital lights came into view. Paul pulled up to emergency and was already shouting for help. Pregnant woman in active labor. Complications. Heavy bleeding. She needs help now. Nurses rushed out with a wheelchair. They descended on Pamela, asking rapid-fire questions Paul did his best to answer. How far along? 9 months, full term. When did contractions start? Around midnight. How much bleeding? Too much. Husband available? Paul's jaw clenched. No. Husband's in Paris. The nurses exchanged a look that said everything. They lifted Pamela from the back seat, and she cried out. Paul followed, still holding her hand. Sir, are you family? A nurse asked. No, Paul said. I'm just... Yes, Pamela interrupted, her voice surprisingly strong despite the pain. She looked at Paul, and something passed between them he couldn't name. He's staying with me. He's all I have. The nurse nodded. Then come on. She's going to need you. They rushed Pamela into labor and delivery. The doctor arrived within minutes, took one look at the situation, and started barking orders. Fetal monitoring, IV fluids, blood pressure check. The numbers that came back made everyone's faces go tight. The baby's in distress, the doctor said quietly to a nurse. Heart rate's dropping. We need to monitor closely. If this doesn't progress quickly, we'll need emergency intervention. Emergency intervention meant surgery, meant something was wrong, meant this tiny person hadn't even entered the world yet and was already fighting for her life. Paul stood beside the bed, still holding Pamela's hand. He'd been there for hours already. The sun had come up outside the window, pale winter light filtering through blinds. I need you to breathe through this one, a nurse said as another wave hit. Pamela couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but grip Paul's hand and scream. That's it, Paul murmured, his other hand stroking her hair back from her sweaty forehead. You're doing so well. Just a little longer. Your daughter's almost here. I can't, Pamela gasped when the contraction released her. Paul, I can't do this anymore. It hurts too much. Something's wrong. I can feel it. The baby's not moving right. Nothing's wrong, Paul lied, and they both knew it was a lie, but Pamela loved him for it anyway. You're strong. You're the strongest person I've ever known, and you're going to meet your daughter soon. She's going to be perfect, just like her mother. What if she's not okay? What if I did something wrong? What if this is my fault? Stop. Paul leaned down so his face was level with hers. His eyes were bloodshot from exhaustion, but they were focused entirely on her. Your baby is going to be fine. Do you know how I know? Pamela shook her head. Because she's yours, and nothing that's yours could ever be anything but extraordinary. Hours blurred together into an endless cycle of pain and brief respite. The sun rose fully, flooding the room with light that seemed too cheerful. Nurses came and went, checking monitors, adjusting IV lines, speaking in low voices about concerning developments. The baby's heart rate kept dropping. Pamela's blood pressure was dangerously high. The bleeding wasn't slowing. Around what Paul thought might be midnight of the second day, though he'd lost all sense of time, a nurse tried to send him home. Sir, you need to rest. You've been here since she came in. That's almost 2 full days. You're going to collapse. I'm not leaving, Paul said simply. His voice was rough from lack of sleep, but the conviction was absolute. This could go on for hours more. You need to take care of yourself. I'm not leaving her. Paul looked at Pamela, who'd finally drifted into an exhausted half-sleep. She stays, I stay. Hospital policy says family only during extended labor. I am family, Paul interrupted. I'm the one who brought her here. I'm the one who's been by her side while her husband drinks wine in France. I'm the one who'll still be here tomorrow and however long this takes. So unless you plan to have security drag me out, I'm staying. The nurse looked at Pamela, then back at Paul. Something in her expression softened. All right, but at least sit down before you fall down. Paul sat, but he never let go of Pamela's hand. Not to eat the granola bar a sympathetic nurse brought. Not to use the bathroom. He made that trip in under 90 seconds. Not for anything. Sometime around dawn of the third day, everything changed. The doctor came in looking more serious than before. Pamela, we need to talk about a cesarean section. The baby's heart rate keeps dropping. You're exhausted. Your body is starting to shut down. If we don't intervene soon... No, Pamela said, her voice weak but determined. No surgery. I can do this. I can... Another contraction hit, and this one was different. Bigger, more urgent. The baby was coming whether anyone was ready or not, moving through the birth canal with sudden, desperate intensity. What followed was chaos. Nurses shouting, the doctor barking orders. Paul pushed aside as medical professionals swarmed around Pamela. He stood against the wall, hands shaking, watching the woman he loved fight for her life and her daughter's life, unable to do anything but pray. "If you can hear me," Paul whispered, his voice breaking, "if you're real, if you care at all, please save her. Please save them both. I'll do anything. Just please don't let her die. Don't let either of them die." Time seemed to stop. The whole world narrowed to this one room, this one woman, this one impossible moment balanced on the edge of tragedy. And then, a sound, small and angry and absolutely perfect, a baby's cry. "It's a girl," the doctor said, and there was relief in her voice that told Paul just how close they'd come to losing everything. "You have a daughter, Pamela." They placed the baby on Pamela's chest, tiny and red and screaming with the fury of someone who'd just fought their way into the world against impossible odds. Pamela looked down at her daughter, and tears streamed down her face, mixing with sweat and exhaustion and profound relief. "Hi, sweetheart," Pamela whispered, her voice raw. "I'm your mama. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry your daddy isn't here. But I promise you, I promise, I'm going to love you enough for both of us. You're going to be so loved, baby girl. So, so loved." The baby's eyes opened, dark and unfocused but searching, looking for her mother, looking for safety, looking for home. Paul stood beside the bed, and his face was wet with tears he didn't remember shedding. He'd been awake for 2 full days, had watched Pamela nearly die, had prayed prayers he'd never prayed before. And now here was this tiny human, this perfect little person who'd fought so hard to be born. "She's perfect," Paul said, his voice rough with emotion. "She is," Pamela agreed, unable to look away from her daughter. The nurses bustled around, doing medical things, weighing the baby, checking vitals, cleaning up. When they finally placed the baby back in Pamela's arms, properly swaddled, the room had settled into a quieter rhythm. "Have you picked a name?" a nurse asked gently. Pamela looked at her daughter, then at Paul, then back at this tiny human who'd just changed everything. "Destiny," she said softly. "Her name is Destiny." "That's beautiful," the nurse said. "What made you choose it?" Pamela's eyes met Paul's across the hospital bed. "Because someone once told me that some people are meant to change everything. I think she's one of those people." Paul's breath caught. He'd said those words in the chaos of bringing Pamela to the hospital, whispered them without thinking. But she'd heard, had remembered, had chosen to make them permanent. The nurses left them alone then, giving them privacy. Pamela held Destiny close, counting tiny fingers and toes, marveling at this person who'd been inside her and was now separate, real, here. "Paul," she said quietly, not looking up from her daughter, I need to tell you something. What is it? Thank you for staying, for not leaving me alone through that, for... Her voice broke. For being here when he wasn't. For being the first person she saw besides me. For being... She couldn't finish. Paul sat carefully on the edge of the hospital bed. Pamela, I would have stayed forever if you'd needed me to. Time doesn't matter. Sleep doesn't matter. Nothing matters except you and her. Why? The question came out as barely more than a whisper. Why would you do that for me? I chose Larry. I married him even after you told me not to. I threw away our friendship because he asked me to. I've given you nothing but pain, and you still... She gestured helplessly between them. Why? Paul looked at Destiny, sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. He thought about the answer to that question, the real answer, the one he'd been hiding for 5 years. But Pamela had just been through hell. She was exhausted and emotionally raw and dealing with the reality that her husband had abandoned her. This wasn't the time for confessions. Because you deserved someone to be there, Paul said instead. Because what Larry did was wrong, and someone needed to show you that not all men are like him. Because... He reached out and gently touched one of Destiny's tiny hands. Because this little one deserves to know that there are people in the world who show up when it matters. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough truth for now. Pamela looked at him for a long moment, studying his face like she was seeing him for the first time. You're a good man, Paul Gary. I'm just a man who cares about you, both of you. Destiny stirred in Pamela's arms, making the small, mewling sounds of a baby starting to wake. Both of them looked down at her, and for a moment they were united in this simple act of witnessing new life. She's going to need more than just me, Pamela said quietly. She's going to need someone who shows up, someone who stays. I'll be here, Paul promised. Whatever you need, however long you need it. I'm not going anywhere. Pamela wanted to ask him why again, wanted to understand what she'd done to deserve this kind of devotion from a man she'd rejected. But she was too tired, and the world was too soft around the edges, and her daughter was making sweet baby sounds that demanded all her attention. Paul? Yeah? Will you hold her, just for a minute? I need to close my eyes. Paul took Destiny with the careful reverence of someone holding the most precious thing in the world. The baby stirred but didn't wake, settling into his arms like she'd been made to fit there. Pamela watched through heavy eyelids as Paul looked down at Destiny. The expression on his face was something she'd never seen before, awe and love and fierce protection all mixed together with a tenderness that made her chest ache. Hi, Destiny, Paul whispered to the sleeping baby. I'm Paul. I'm your... He paused, seeming to struggle with the word. I'm going to take care of you and your mama. I promise. Nobody's ever going to hurt either of you again. Not while I'm here. Not while I'm breathing. It was a promise he had no right to make, a promise that overstepped every boundary between them. But watching him hold her daughter with such tenderness, Pamela believed him anyway. She fell asleep to the sound of Paul humming a lullaby she didn't recognize, and for the first time in months, she didn't have nightmares. When she woke hours later, Paul was still there, still holding Destiny, still keeping his promises. Across the ocean in Paris, Larry Donald posted another photo to his private social media, the yacht in Monaco, champagne glasses raised in a toast. His pregnant mistress Andrea was visible in the background, her hand on her own swollen belly, laughing at something on her phone. The caption read, "Living my best life. Sometimes you have to leave the old behind to embrace the new." The timestamp on his post was exactly synchronized with the moment Destiny had been born. Not close, not approximate. The exact minute his daughter entered the world, Larry had been toasting his new life. He'd missed it, not because he couldn't be there, but because he'd chosen not to be. because he'd decided that champagne and a mistress mattered more than being present for the birth of his child. And somewhere in the back of Pamela's exhausted mind, even as she slept, a seed of something new began to grow. Not love for Paul, not yet. She was too raw, too broken, too unsure to trust those feelings, but understanding that the man holding her daughter was worth more than all of Larry's money could ever buy. The question was whether she'd realize it before it was too late. The question was whether she could find the strength to choose differently this time. The question was whether love could be learned, or if some people were just destined to make the same mistakes over and over until they finally destroyed themselves completely. Time would tell. But for now, in this hospital room, there was just a man, a woman and a baby who'd fought harder than anyone should have to exist. And that, Paul thought, was enough. Chapter 3. The silent savior coming home from the hospital should have been a moment of joy. New mother, new baby, new beginning. Instead, Pamela stood in the doorway of the mansion with Destiny bundled in her arms and felt nothing but overwhelming dread settle over her like a funeral shroud. The house was freezing. Pamela's breath came out in visible puffs as she stepped inside, and immediately Destiny started fussing, her tiny face scrunching up in discomfort. Babies knew things, even newborns. They knew when something was wrong. "It's okay, sweetheart," Pamela murmured, trying to keep her voice calm even as panic rose in her throat. "Mama's going to fix this." She walked to the thermostat and pressed the button. Nothing happened. She tried the lights. Nothing. The digital clock on the microwave was dark. The refrigerator was silent. No comforting hum of machinery keeping food cold. The electricity was off. The gas was off. The heat was off. Larry had left for Europe without paying the bills. "No," Pamela whispered, the word coming out strangled. "No, no, no." She had a newborn baby. It was January. The temperature outside was below freezing, and inside it wasn't much better. And she was standing in an $8 million house with no heat, no power, and $20 in her wallet that she'd never even spent because she'd been too busy nearly dying in childbirth. Paul, who'd driven them home from the hospital, appeared beside her. He'd been checking the mail that had piled up during her hospital stay, sorting through what looked like bills and more bills. "What's wrong?" "Everything's off. The heat, the electricity, everything." Pamela's voice was shaking, and Destiny was starting to cry in earnest now, that newborn wail that was impossible to ignore. "He didn't pay the bills before he left. I have $20, Paul. $20 and a baby and a house with no heat. What am I supposed to do?" The last question came out as almost a wail, Pamela's composure finally cracking under the weight of everything. She'd been so strong in the hospital, had fought through labor and pain and terror. But this casual cruelty, this abandonment, this evidence that Larry truly didn't care whether she and Destiny lived or died, it was too much. Paul pulled out his phone without hesitation. "Let me make some calls." "You can't pay my bills, Paul. This isn't your responsibility. I can't let you—" "Watch me." His voice was firm, brooking no argument. "Pamela, you have a 3-day-old baby. You're still recovering from a traumatic birth. I'm not letting you sit in a freezing house out of principle. This isn't about pride. This is about survival." He was already dialing, pacing the foyer, while speaking in low, urgent tones to someone on the other end. Pamela heard fragments. "Emergency situation. Infant in the house. Yes, I'll pay the reconnection fees. Today, it has to be today." Destiny's cries were getting louder, more distressed. Pamela tried to soothe her, rocking gently, but babies knew when their mothers were upset. She could feel her own stress transferring to her daughter, creating a feedback loop of anxiety. "Let me take her," Paul said, ending his call and reaching for Destiny. "You sit down. You're shaking." Pamela realized he was right. Her whole body was trembling, from cold, from exhaustion, from the crushing weight of her situation. She sank onto the bottom step of the grand staircase while Paul walked Destiny around the foyer, murmuring soft words that somehow, miraculously, started to calm her. "The electric company is sending someone within the hour," Paul said, still walking with Destiny. "The gas company said they can have someone here by this afternoon. I paid all the reconnection fees and the outstanding balances over the phone. It's done." "Paul, I can't accept this. I can't. It's a loan," Paul interrupted firmly. "Pay me back whenever you can, or don't. I don't care. What I care about is making sure you and Destiny are safe and warm. Everything else is just details." Pamela wanted to argue, wanted to maintain some shred of dignity and independence. But Destiny was finally quiet in Paul's arms, her tiny face relaxed in a way it hadn't been since they'd entered the cold house, and Pamela was so tired, so incredibly bone-deep tired. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, thank you." Within an hour, the electricity was back on. The lights blazed to life, the refrigerator started humming, all the small sounds of a functioning house returning. By late afternoon, the heat was running too, warming the massive space degree by degree. Paul stayed the entire time, making sure everything was working properly. He'd also, somehow, Pamela didn't even want to know how, gotten the water bill paid, arranged for grocery delivery that arrived filled with baby supplies and easy meals for a new mother, and had even assembled the portable crib that had been sitting in boxes because Larry had never bothered. "Paul, you've done so much already. You should go home. Get some sleep. You haven't slept in days." "I'm fine," Paul said, though the dark circles under his eyes told a different story. "Let me just make sure the furnace is working properly. These old systems can be temperamental." Let me just make sure. Paul spent the next hour in the basement checking the furnace, replacing the filter that should have been changed months ago, making minor adjustments that Pamela didn't understand, but that apparently improved efficiency. When he came back upstairs, there was dust in his hair and grease on his shirt. "You didn't have to do that," Pamela said. She was feeding Destiny on the couch, finally warm for the first time since coming home. "I wanted to make sure you wouldn't have problems in the middle of the night. The last thing you need is the heat failing when you're alone with a newborn." Alone. The word hung in the air between them, because she was alone, wasn't she? Despite the mansion and the expensive furniture and the joint bank accounts that she apparently had no access to. Despite being married to one of the most successful businessmen in the city. She was completely, utterly alone, except for this man who kept showing up and asking for nothing in return. "Why are you doing all this?" Pamela asked quietly, looking up from Destiny's peaceful face. "And don't say, because it's the right thing to do. Don't say because you're a good neighbor. I need to understand, Paul. Why would you spend days at a hospital with me? Why would you pay thousands of dollars in bills for someone else's wife? Why would you—" Her voice broke. "Why would you care this much?" Paul sat down in the chair across from her, and for a long moment he didn't speak. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something tender and painful at the same time. "Because I pay attention," he finally said. "I've always paid attention to you, Pamela, and what I've seen over the past 5 years is someone slowly disappearing into a marriage that's destroying her. I've watched you stop laughing, stop going out with friends, stop doing all the things that made you who you were. I've watched Larry treat you like property instead of a person, and I've waited, hoping that maybe someday you'd realize you deserved better. But why wait? Why stay? You could have moved anywhere, Paul, done anything. Instead, you bought a house next door to a married woman and just stayed. Because being near you, even if you belonged to someone else, was better than being anywhere else in the world," Paul said simply. "Because I couldn't be with you, but I couldn't be far from you either. Because—" He stopped himself. "Because what?" "Because I needed to be here for the day when Larry finally showed you who he really is. I needed to be close enough to help when you needed it." The truth of what he wasn't saying hung heavy in the air. But Pamela was still married to Larry, still legally bound to a man who'd discarded her like garbage, and she couldn't examine what Paul's devotion really meant until she was free. "I should let you rest," Paul said, standing. "You need sleep, and I need to go home before I fall asleep standing up." "Paul, wait." Pamela shifted Destiny in her arms. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for everything you've done, for the hospital, for today, for all of it. You don't owe me anything, Pamela. Helping you isn't a transaction. It's just—" Paul smiled tiredly. "It's just what you do for people you care about." After he left, Pamela sat in the warm house holding her sleeping daughter and tried to process everything. In the span of a week, her entire world had shifted. She'd gone into labor alone, nearly died in childbirth, come home to a frozen house, and been saved at every turn by a man who owed her nothing. Meanwhile, her husband was still in Paris, still unreachable, still posting photos of his European adventure like nothing was wrong. Pamela's phone buzzed. A notification from social media, one of those algorithmic suggestions of people you might know. She opened it without thinking. It was a photo of Larry. Not from his regular social media that she had access to, but from Andrea's account that Pamela had apparently been tagged in by someone else. The photo showed Larry and Andrea on what looked like a yacht, glasses raised in a toast. Andrea's pregnant belly was prominently displayed, her hand resting on it possessively, but it was the caption that made Pamela's blood run cold. "To new beginnings. Can't believe we're having twins. Larry and I are so blessed. Due in April." The timestamp on the photo was from 3 days ago, the exact day Destiny had been born. While Pamela had been in hour 40 of labor, fighting for her life and her daughter's life, Larry had been toasting his new family, his replacement family, the woman who'd succeeded where Pamela had apparently failed. Twins. Andrea was pregnant with twins, and based on the timeline, she would have gotten pregnant around the same time Pamela had, which meant Larry had been sleeping with both of them, planning a future with Andrea while still married to Pamela, building an entirely separate life that he'd always intended to choose over the one they'd built together. Pamela didn't cry. Something inside her had gone beyond tears, moved past the realm where emotions like sadness and hurt existed. She felt cold, clear, like all the fog that had been clouding her judgment for 5 years had suddenly lifted. She looked down at Destiny sleeping peacefully in her arms. This beautiful girl who'd fought so hard to be born, this innocent child who deserved so much better than a father who couldn't even bother to answer the phone when she was being delivered. "I'm going to protect you," Pamela whispered to her daughter. "I'm going to make sure you never have to depend on men like your father. I'm going to teach you that you're worth more than expensive things and empty promises, and I'm going to make sure—" Her voice hardened. "I'm going to make sure he pays for what he's done. Not to me, I don't matter, but to you. He abandoned you before you were even born, and that is unforgivable." That night, after Destiny was fed and changed and sleeping in the newly assembled crib, Pamela made a decision. She couldn't keep living like this, dependent on Paul's charity, trapped in a marriage to a man who'd replaced her, raising a daughter in a house that felt like a tomb. She needed to be strong, needed to be smart, needed to figure out how to survive without Larry's money, how to provide for Destiny, how to build a life that didn't depend on anyone else's mercy. The question was how. Pamela looked across the lawn at Paul's house, where lights still burned in what she knew was his office. He was probably working, making up for the days he'd spent at the hospital, trying to keep his own life together while constantly saving hers. An idea formed, dangerous and desperate, and possibly brilliant. Paul was a corporate strategist. He knew how to find weaknesses in companies, how to trace money, how to use information as a weapon. If anyone could teach her how to survive, how to fight back, how to take control of her own life, It was him. But could she ask? Could she drag him further into her mess? Could she risk using his feelings for her, feelings he'd hidden but that she'd finally started to see, to get what she needed? Pamela looked at Destiny again, at this tiny person who depended on her completely, who deserved a mother that was strong and capable, not broken and helpless. The answer was yes. She could ask. She would ask. Because sometimes survival meant being willing to accept help, even if it came with complications. Tomorrow, she decided, tomorrow she would knock on Paul's door and ask him to teach her everything he knew. Tomorrow she would start building the weapons she'd need to fight back. But tonight she would just hold her daughter and be grateful they'd both survived this long. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the manicured lawn in white. Inside, Pamela Broad made promises to her sleeping child, promises about strength and independence and never, ever being at the mercy of a man who didn't deserve her. She didn't know yet that keeping those promises would transform her completely. Didn't know that the journey from victim to victor would cost her everything she thought she knew about herself. But she was about to find out. Chapter 4. The education begins. 3 days after coming home from the hospital, Pamela stood on Paul's doorstep with Destiny in a baby carrier strapped to her chest. Her body still ached from childbirth, and exhaustion had settled into her bones like a permanent condition. But she was here anyway, because waiting meant weakness, and she was done being weak. Paul answered on the second knock, and his expression immediately shifted to concern. "Pamela, is everything okay? Is Destiny—" "We're fine. Can I come in? I need to ask you something." Paul stepped aside immediately, ushering her into a home that was so different from the mansion across the lawn, it might as well have existed in another universe. Where Larry's house was all cold marble and expensive art, Paul's was warm hardwood and comfortable furniture that looked actually lived in. Books everywhere, a coffee mug on the table, a blanket draped over the couch like someone had recently been napping there. It felt like a home, a real one. "Sit," Paul said, already moving toward the kitchen. "I'll make tea. Or coffee. When's the last time you ate?" "I didn't come here for food, Paul. Humor me anyway." While Paul busied himself in the kitchen, Pamela sat carefully on the couch, adjusting Destiny against her chest. The baby was sleeping, her tiny face peaceful in a way that made Pamela's heart ache. This innocent child had no idea what kind of war her mother was about to start. Paul returned with tea and toast, setting them on the coffee table within easy reach. "Okay. What did you want to ask me?" Pamela took a breath. "I want you to teach me. Everything you know about corporate strategy, about finding weaknesses, about using information as a weapon. I want to learn how to take down someone's empire from the inside out." Paul's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "You're talking about Larry." "I'm talking about surviving, about making sure Destiny and I never have to depend on someone who can just abandon us. About—" Pamela's voice hardened. "About making sure he pays for what he's done. Not to me. I'm an adult. I made my choices. But to her." She touched Destiny's back gently. "He left his daughter before she was even born. And I need to know that if I'm going to keep her safe, keep us safe, I need weapons." "Pamela, you're exhausted. You just gave birth. Maybe you should—" "Don't tell me to wait," Pamela interrupted. "Don't tell me I need rest or time to think or any of that. I've had plenty of time to think, Paul. I've had 3 days of sitting in that freezing house feeding my baby and realizing that everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. I'm done waiting. I'm done being the victim. So, I'm asking you, will you teach me, or do I need to figure this out myself?" Paul studied her face for a long moment. Then he set down his own mug and leaned forward. "If I do this, if I teach you what I know, you need to understand something first. This isn't a quick fix. Learning corporate strategy, financial forensics, legal maneuvering, it takes months, maybe years to really master. And you have a newborn, which means your time and energy are going to be limited. I understand. I'm not finished. Paul's voice was gentle but firm. What you're talking about, going after Larry legally, financially, it's going to get ugly. He's not going to just roll over. He's going to fight back, and he has resources you don't have. Lawyers, connections, money to burn on making your life hell. Are you prepared for that? Yes. And you need to know that once we start digging, we might find things you don't want to know. Things about how he made his money, where it came from, what he's been hiding. If we're going to do this right, we need to be thorough, which means looking at everything, no matter how much it hurts. Pamela thought about the photo of Andrea and Larry on the yacht, about the twins due in April, about her husband building a whole separate life while she'd been pregnant and alone. There's nothing you could find that would hurt worse than what I already know. Paul nodded slowly. All right then, if you're serious about this, we start small. Basic financial literacy first. You need to understand how money moves before you can track it. Then we'll move into corporate structures, shell companies, offshore accounts. But Pamela, he waited until she met his eyes. This is going to take time. You can't rush this. And in the meantime, you need to take care of yourself and destiny. That comes first. Always. I can do both. We'll see. And so began the strangest months of Pamela's life. Every morning after Destiny's first feeding, Pamela would bring her across the lawn to Paul's house. They'd set up the portable crib in his office, and while the baby slept, Paul would teach Pamela the fundamentals of finance and corporate strategy. It was harder than Pamela had imagined. The terminology alone was overwhelming. Amortization schedules, liquid assets, capital gains, double-entry bookkeeping. Paul would explain concepts that seemed straightforward, and then Pamela would try to apply them and realize she'd understood nothing. I don't get it, she said one morning, staring at a spreadsheet that might as well have been written in hieroglyphics. This column should equal that column, but the numbers don't match. Because there's a hidden row, Paul said patiently. He'd said this exact thing twice already. Companies sometimes bury expenses in subcategories to make their balance sheets look cleaner. You have to expand every section to see the real numbers. Why would they do that? It's lying. It's creative accounting, which is legal until it's not. The trick is knowing where the line is. Destiny woke up crying, and Pamela had to stop everything to feed her. By the time the baby was settled again, Pamela had lost the thread of what they'd been discussing, and they had to start over. This became the pattern. 10 minutes of learning, interrupted by Destiny needing something. Another 15 minutes, then the baby needed changing. Sometimes Pamela was so exhausted from nighttime feedings that she'd fall asleep mid-lesson, jerking awake to find Paul had covered her with a blanket and was working quietly while Destiny slept on his shoulder. This is impossible, Pamela said one afternoon, 3 weeks into their lessons. She'd been trying to understand a simple balance sheet for an hour, and nothing was making sense. I'm too stupid for this. I should just give up. You're not stupid, Paul said firmly. You're learning something complex while running on 4 hours of broken sleep. That's not stupidity. That's heroism. It doesn't feel heroic. It feels like failure. Paul set down the document he'd been reviewing and looked at her directly. Pamela, do you know what I see when I look at you? A woman who can't even read a basic spreadsheet. I see someone who nearly died giving birth and was back on her feet in days. I see someone who's nursing a newborn while trying to learn graduate-level finance. I see someone who's doing the work of 3 people and still showing up every morning ready to learn more. He leaned forward. You're not failing. You're building skills that will protect you and Destiny for the rest of your lives. That takes time, so stop being so hard on yourself. Tears pricked Pamela's eyes. She was always crying lately, her emotions swinging wildly from determination to despair and back again. The hormones didn't help, neither did the exhaustion. What if I'm not strong enough? What if I can't do this? Then we'll find another way. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're going to master this because you have to, because destiny is watching and you want her to see a mother who fights. Slowly, painfully, Pamela started to understand. The terminology became familiar. The patterns started making sense. She learned to read financial statements the way Paul did, not just looking at the numbers on the surface, but understanding what they meant beneath. 2 months in, Pamela found her first discrepancy in Larry's publicly available financial filings. It was small, a quarterly report where the numbers didn't quite add up between 2 different documents. "Look here," she said excitedly, pointing at her laptop screen. "This form says the company earned this amount in the 3rd quarter, but this other filing for the same quarter shows different revenue. They don't match." Paul leaned over to look, and a smile spread across his face. "That's very good, Pamela. That's exactly the kind of thing we're looking for. Small inconsistencies that suggest someone's playing games with the numbers." "What does it mean?" "Could be nothing. Could be an honest mistake. Or it could be evidence that someone's reporting different numbers to different agencies, which would be fraud." "Can we prove it?" "Not yet. But it's a thread. We pull on it and see what unravels." 3 months in, Destiny smiled for the first time. A real smile, not gas, but actual joy. She was lying on a blanket in Paul's office while Pamela and Paul worked, and she looked up at both of them and smiled so wide it was impossible not to smile back. "Did you see that?" Pamela gasped. "Paul, she smiled at you." "She smiled at both of us," Paul corrected, but he looked ridiculously pleased anyway. He got down on the floor next to Destiny, making silly faces, trying to get her to smile again. "Come on, beautiful girl, show us that smile again." Destiny obliged, and Pamela felt something in her chest expand. This was what family looked like, she realized. Not the cold mansion and expensive gifts. This. 2 people on a floor making faces at a baby, celebrating small milestones, being present for the moments that mattered. 4 months in, Pamela discovered that Larry had created shell corporations in Delaware that existed only on paper. Companies with no employees, no office space, no actual business operations, just bank accounts that money moved through. "Why would he do this?" she asked Paul, showing him what she'd found. "To hide money. You move funds from the main company into these shells, then from the shells into offshore accounts. Makes it harder to track where the money's really going. Which is fine if you're doing it for legitimate tax purposes. Not fine if you're doing it to evade taxes or hide income from divorces or lawsuits." "Is that what he's doing? Hiding money?" "Probably. We'd need more information to be sure. But this pattern..." Paul pointed at the web of companies Pamela had mapped out. "This is classic money laundering structure. So we can use this against him?" "Eventually. We need to build an airtight case first. One transaction isn't enough. We need to show a pattern of behavior, years of it, ideally." 5 months in, Larry finally called. Pamela was feeding Destiny when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She answered without thinking. "Pamela." Larry's voice sounded strange, distant and tinny. "I heard you had the baby. Why didn't you tell me?" The audacity of the question left Pamela speechless for a moment. "I tried to tell you. I called you 17 times while I was in labor. You turned off your phone. My phone died. I told you I was going to be hard to reach during the negotiations." "Your phone didn't die, Larry. You posted photos to social media while I was in labor. You were on a yacht, toasting your new family while I was fighting for our daughter's life." Silence on the other end. Then, "What are you talking about?" "Andrea, the twins, the life you've been building while still married to me. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" More silence. When Larry spoke again, his voice had changed, harder, more calculated. "I don't know what you think you know, but you're obviously emotional and confused. Postpartum hormones can make women irrational. Maybe you should talk to a doctor." The gaslighting was so blatant it was almost funny. Almost. I'm not confused, Larry. I know exactly what's happening. You abandoned your wife and daughter to start a new family, and you're going to pay for it. Are you threatening me, Pamela? Because that would be very unwise. I have lawyers, very expensive lawyers. So do I, Pamela lied. She didn't have lawyers yet, but Paul had been teaching her, and that was almost as good. Larry laughed, a cold sound that used to intimidate her, but now just made her angry. With what money? The accounts are in my name, the house is in my name, you have nothing. The house is in both our names, community property state, and you might want to check those account balances, Larry. I've been doing some research on marital assets. Turns out wives have rights. You're bluffing. Try me. Larry's voice dropped to a tone she'd heard before. Listen very carefully, Pamela. You want to play games? Fine. But remember, I have resources you can't imagine. I can tie you up in court for years. I can make it so you never see a penny. I can make your life hell. So I suggest you calm down, stop making accusations you can't prove, and we can discuss this like civilized adults when I get back. When are you getting back? When I'm ready. The line went dead. Pamela sat holding her phone, shaking with rage and something else, something that felt like power, because Larry was worried. She could hear it in his voice beneath the threats. He was worried about what she might know, what she might do. Good. Let him worry. 6 months in, Destiny said her first word. It wasn't Mama, it was Papa. She was sitting in Paul's lap while he worked, and she looked up at him and said clear as day, Papa. Paul froze. Pamela, working across the table, looked up sharply. Did she just... Paul looked at Pamela with an expression caught between joy and guilt. I'm sorry. I didn't teach her that. I would never... It's okay, Pamela said, and realized she meant it. She hears me call you Paul. Papa is close. It's natural. But later that night, alone in her bedroom with Destiny asleep in the crib, Pamela wondered if it was really okay, wondered what it meant that her daughter's first word was for a man who wasn't her biological father, wondered if she was letting things get too complicated, too messy, wondered if maybe messy was okay if it meant Destiny was happy and loved. 7 months in, Pamela found the smoking gun. She'd been going through years of Larry's tax returns, comparing them against publicly available information about his company's performance. And there, buried in schedules and amendments and footnotes, she found it. Systematic tax evasion spanning 8 years. Money being funneled through the shell corporations, declared as business expenses that didn't exist, deductions claimed for charitable donations that were never actually made, millions of dollars in evaded taxes. Paul, Pamela said quietly, her hand shaking as she looked at the evidence spread across 3 monitors. I think I found it. Paul came to look over her shoulder, and she watched his expression change as he understood what he was seeing. Oh, this is good. This is very, very good. If you're right, and I think you are, this is criminal. Not civil court where you fight over assets. This is potential prison time. What do we do with it? We verify it, triple-check every single transaction, make absolutely sure we're reading this correctly. Then we make copies of everything. Then we build a timeline showing the pattern. And then, Paul looked at her, then we decide how to use it. Because Pamela, once we expose this, there's no going back. Larry's entire empire will collapse. His freedom will be at risk. He will fight back with everything he has. I know, Pamela said. I'm ready. But she wasn't sure she was ready. Not really. Because learning to fight was one thing. Actually stepping into the ring was something else entirely. 8 months after Destiny's birth, Pamela was a different person. She'd lost the baby weight, but it was more than that. She stood differently, spoke differently. The defeated woman who'd stood in Larry's bedroom watching him pack for Paris, that woman was gone. In her place was someone harder, sharper, someone who could read a balance sheet in seconds and spot fraud with a glance. Someone who'd learned that survival meant being willing to fight dirty. Someone who was finally ready to stop learning and start destroying. "I think it's time," Pamela said to Paul one morning as Destiny played with blocks on his office floor. "I think we have enough. I think we're ready to move." Paul looked at the mountains of evidence they'd accumulated. Hundreds of hours of work, thousands of documents, an airtight case that would dismantle Larry's empire piece by piece. "Are you sure?" "Once we start, we can't stop halfway." Pamela looked at Destiny, at this beautiful child who was growing up in Paul's office, learning that work and dedication mattered, that fighting for what was right was worth the cost. "I'm sure," Pamela said. "Let's destroy him." Chapter 5, The First Strike. They spent 2 more weeks preparing. Paul insisted on triple-checking everything, making sure their evidence was unimpeachable. Pamela learned to document sources, to create timelines that prosecutors would find compelling, to anticipate every possible defense Larry's lawyers might raise. "He's going to claim these shell corporations are legitimate business structures," Paul said, playing devil's advocate. "How do you prove they're not?" "By showing they have no actual business operations, no employees, no office space, no product or service. They exist only to move money. That's textbook money laundering." "And the tax evasion?" "We have 8 years of returns where he claimed deductions for expenses that never occurred. I've cross-referenced every charitable donation he claimed against the charity's own financial disclosures. Half of them never received any money from him." "What about statute of limitations?" "Tax fraud doesn't have one if the IRS can prove willful evasion. And this is willful. No one accidentally evades millions in taxes across 8 years. Paul smiled. "You've learned well." "I had a good teacher." On a Tuesday morning in early September, exactly 8 months and 2 weeks after Destiny's birth, they made their move. Paul had a contact at the IRS, someone he'd worked with on a previous case. They arranged a meeting at a coffee shop downtown. Pamela brought copies of everything they'd found, organized in binders with tabs and timelines and highlighted sections. The IRS agent, a woman named Jennifer Rodriguez, who looked like she was in her mid-40s and had seen everything, flipped through the first binder in silence, then the second. Then she looked up at Pamela with an expression that was hard to read. "Where did you get all this?" "Public records mostly," Pamela said. "Tax filings, corporate registrations, SEC disclosures. I just put it all together and found the patterns." "You just put it together," Jennifer repeated slowly. "Mom, what do you do for a living?" "I'm a stay-at-home mother." Jennifer looked at Paul, who nodded confirmation. She taught herself, over the past 8 months, while caring for an infant. "Jesus Christ," Jennifer muttered. She went back to the binders, this time reading more carefully. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Finally, she looked up again. "This is solid, really solid. If even half of this holds up under investigation, we're looking at criminal charges, multiple felonies, potential prison time." Pamela felt her heart rate spike. This was real. This was actually happening. "How long until you can act on it?" Paul asked. "I need to bring this to my supervisors. Get approval for a full investigation. That could take a few weeks. But based on what I'm seeing here," Jennifer tapped the binders, "I'd say you've just ruined this man's life. I hope you're prepared for that." "I'm prepared," Pamela said. Jennifer studied her face. "He's going to fight back. Men like this always do. He'll hire expensive lawyers. He'll drag this out. He'll make accusations about you, that you fabricated evidence, that you're a scorned wife making things up. Are you ready for that?" "Yes. And you understand that once this investigation goes public, there's no taking it back? Your name will be attached to it. Everyone will know you turned in your husband." He's not my husband anymore, not in any way that matters. And yes, I understand. Jennifer nodded slowly. All right then. Give me 2 weeks to get the ball rolling. In the meantime, don't contact him. Don't give him any warning. The element of surprise is the only advantage you have right now. 2 weeks later, Larry's bank accounts were frozen pending IRS investigation. Pamela found out when her phone exploded with notifications. First, a news alert. CEO Larry Donald under federal investigation for tax fraud. Then messages from people she hadn't heard from in years, asking if she knew anything about it. Then finally a call from a number she didn't recognize. She answered, her hand shaking. Hello? Mrs. Donald? This is Detective Morrison with the Financial Crimes Unit. I'm calling to let you know that we've opened a formal investigation into your husband's business dealings. We'll need to interview you as part of this process. When would be convenient? Any time, Pamela said. I'll help however I can. That's good to hear. Most spouses aren't so cooperative. There was a pause. I should mention, we received an anonymous tip that included extensive documentation of potential fraud. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? I might, Pamela said carefully. Well, whoever put that together did us a hell of a favor. Saved us months of investigation. We're looking at charges that could put Mr. Donald away for a significant amount of time. After the call ended, Pamela sat on her couch with Destiny playing at her feet and tried to process what she'd just done. She'd potentially sent her husband, Destiny's father, to prison. She'd destroyed his business, frozen his assets, ruined his reputation. And she felt nothing but relief. That evening, there was a knock at the door. Pamela looked through the peephole and saw Larry standing on her doorstep. He looked nothing like the polished businessman who'd left for Paris 9 months ago. His suit was wrinkled, his hair was disheveled, his face was red with rage. Pamela opened the door but kept the chain on. What do you want, Larry? What do I want? His voice was shaking. My accounts are frozen. Federal agents showed up at my office. My board is demanding my resignation. What the hell did you do? I found out what happens when you abandon your wife and child. I found out what you've been hiding, and I turned it over to the proper authorities. You little... Larry lunged at the door, and Pamela slammed it shut, locking it quickly. He pounded on the other side. You think you're so smart. You think you've won. I will destroy you, Pamela. I will take everything. I will make sure you never see a penny of my money. I will... Your money? Pamela called through the door. That's not your money, Larry. That's money you stole. From the government, from investors, from everyone stupid enough to trust you. And now you're going to pay it back. I will fight this. I have lawyers. You have nothing, Pamela interrupted. Your accounts are frozen. Your assets are being seized. By this time tomorrow, you'll be lucky if you can afford a lawyer at all. The pounding stopped. When Larry spoke again, his voice had changed, from rage to something closer to desperation. Pamela, please, think about Destiny. Think about what this will do to her. Having a father in prison, growing up with that stigma, is that what you want for our daughter? Our daughter, like he had any right to claim her. Destiny's father abandoned her before she was even born, Pamela said coldly. She'll grow up just fine without you. Please, I'm begging you. Call them off. Tell them you made a mistake. Tell them, I didn't make a mistake, Larry, you did. 8 years of mistakes, and now you're going to pay for all of them. Pamela. Go away, Larry, and don't come back. If you set foot on this property again, I'll call the police. The silence that followed was absolute. Then she heard footsteps walking away, a car door slamming, an engine starting, the sound of Larry Donald driving away from the life he'd destroyed. Pamela sank to the floor, her back against the door, and started shaking, not from fear, from the sheer overwhelming weight of what she'd just done. There was a knock on the back door, the one that led from the kitchen to the yard. Pamela knew who it was before she looked. Paul stood there with Destiny's diaper bag in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. "I saw his car. Figured you might need this." Pamela let him in, and they sat at the kitchen table while Destiny dozed in her playpen. Paul poured wine, just half a glass for Pamela since she was still nursing, and they sat in comfortable silence. "You did it," Paul said finally. "You really did it. We did it. I couldn't have done any of this without you." "Yes, you could have. I just gave you tools. You're the one who used them." Pamela took a sip of wine and felt some of the tension start to drain from her shoulders. "Is it wrong that I don't feel guilty? That I don't feel anything except relief?" "No," Paul said. "It's not wrong. He made his choices. You're just making sure he faces the consequences." "What happens now?" "Now you file for divorce, full custody, division of assets, or what's left of them once the government is done. You start building the life you deserve." "And you?" Pamela looked at him. "What happens with you?" Paul was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to happen with me?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Because they'd been dancing around this for months. The growing closeness, the way Destiny called him Papa, the fact that Pamela spent more time at Paul's house than her own, the moments when their hands would brush and neither would pull away. "I don't know," Pamela said honestly. "I'm still married to Larry, still legally bound to him, and I won't start something new until I'm completely free of him." "I understand. I can wait." "You've been waiting for years, Paul. That's not fair to you." "Fair?" Paul smiled sadly. "None of this is fair, but I'm not waiting out of obligation or hope that you'll reward me for my patience. I'm waiting because being in your life in whatever capacity you'll allow is better than not being in it at all." Pamela felt tears prick her eyes. "What did I do to deserve you?" "You didn't do anything. You don't have to deserve love, Pamela. It's not something you earn. It's something freely given." They sat together in the kitchen, not quite touching but closer than before, while Destiny slept peacefully nearby. And for the first time in 9 months, Pamela let herself imagine a future that didn't include Larry, a future that might include Paul, a future that looked nothing like what she'd planned, but might be better than anything she'd dreamed. But first, she had a war to win, and win she would, because she'd learned something important over the past months. She was stronger than she'd ever known, and she was done letting anyone, Larry, fear, doubt, make her feel small. The battle was just beginning, but Pamela Broad was ready to fight. Chapter 6. The Custody War. The divorce proceedings began in October, nearly 10 months after Destiny's birth. Pamela had expected it to be difficult, but she hadn't anticipated just how vicious Larry would be when backed into a corner. His lawyers filed